welcome again to this edition of Capitol Report. I'm David Nicholas with you here on WCMU Public TV, and I'm pleased to welcome back Congressman John Moolenaar of Midland. He serves in Michigan's 4th U.S. Congressional District, first elected in 2014. He is in his 3rd term. Good to see you again, sir.
Thank you, David.
The President has delivered the State of the Union address and submitted a budget proposal, and along with these traditional protocols was the matter of impeachment. We know how the House voted on the 2 articles, and we know the outcome of the Senate trial. But my question is, did you feel that the President in any way acted non-presidential, perhaps warranting something along the lines of a censure as opposed to the impeachment proceedings that transpired?
Well, first of all, you know, the President was acquitted by the Senate, and it's something that took a lot of time away from the work that we could have been getting done in Congress. You know, there are people who wanted to impeach the President from day one when he got elected. Even before he got elected, they were talking about how to overturn the election. And so, to me, it's time that we move on. You know, this President has not acted the way other presidents have. I think we all recognize he's a disruptor. He's someone who takes his own cues in terms of how he's going to govern. But I tend to look at the results that he's had, and they've been very positive for our country. And so where we may not agree with every tweet, with every statement, at the end of the day, you know, the economy is strong. America is stronger as a nation with his leadership. And I think these continual investigations and the impeachment itself was a big distraction. It kept us from getting a trade deal done. It took a year to get the USMCA done, which now has benefited the United States and Canada and Mexico. But this impeachment was a huge distraction and was very partisan in nature.
Would there have been anything that you or your colleagues felt, and correct me if, is there anything other than a censure, something that even the congressional delegation would have said to the President or attempted to say to the President that the actions or the way of acting was something that was not of full support from the Republican side, again, short of the impeachment?
You know, I think when you look at the phone call, the transcript of the call, clearly he was saying that corruption is a problem in Ukraine. That was something that the new Ukrainian president campaigned on. He identified some areas that actually already were under investigation. So to me, I didn't see anything wrong with what he said. The Ukrainian president said he did not feel pressure. The aid was granted, and so to me that was a huge distraction. If people disagree with something the president says or does, we always have the freedom of speech to express that. And I think it's time that we move on and get things done for the American people.
We have to agree that regardless of political affiliation, the level of partisanship is certainly at a very high level, if not an all-time high. What do your constituents say to you about the climate in Washington when they look at that versus any progress or slowdown on issues given dealing with the issues that are before us in the country when it comes to trying to navigate very partisan waters right now?
My constituents want me to work for the good of the country and for our district and our state of Michigan. That's something I try and do. You know, you can have disagreements on policy, strong debates, strong opinions on things, but at the end of the day, where we can work together, Congress should work together with the president. Our government functions best when you have people looking for common ground and finding solutions for problems. And so when it came to the new trade agreement, I thought that was a huge success for the president, but also for Congress working in a bipartisan way. It's going to help.
Where is that level of bipartisanship then? Because we certainly are not going to see it right now between the president and Speaker Pelosi, Minority Leader Schumer, Senate Majority Leader McConnell. And at the very top, obviously, it's on full display all the time. What is the working relationship that you have? And we'll get into some of the more specifics of current things being worked on. But overall, that level of working relationship that you have with the people day to day on the other side of the aisle.
Well, I think there's always open communications. We meet as a Michigan delegation periodically, Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate members. to talk about common issues. You know, we work together on the Sioux Locks, we work together on the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, work together on the trade agreement. You know, there are some issues where, you know, there's, you know, polar opposites. But where we can, we try and work together. And I would say, you know, relationships in Congress, you know, sometimes they get strained, but overall I try and look for the best in others and recognize that someone who may disagree with me isn't necessarily a bad person, but may have a different opinion. They may represent a different district with different priorities, and so you look for areas of common ground to work on to solve problems.
You brought up the significance of the new trade deals that have been signed, albeit the delay with the impeachment proceedings that we went through. There was, though, and continues to be a significant impact in Michigan because of the rounds of tariffs. Are the tariffs, and help us out here, the tariffs separate from, or were they an interim step to get to the trade deal? Are we talking two separate issues? Because there we have seen a very strong impact to the negative side in Michigan, and yet the trade deals are encouraging. Do the tariffs now, can they be set aside, or are the tariffs still going to continue to have an effect?
It's a great question. They are two separate areas, but they relate to each other. And so with these new agreements, you know, the tariffs, I view those as a negotiating position, a negotiating tactic that bring attention to issues that hopefully can resolve when it comes to new trade agreements. And so when you look at our relationship with China, I think it was appropriate the president raised these levels tariffs to get the attention of the Chinese leadership because they were stealing our technology. They were forcing companies to do business in China. They had to locate there, all sorts of, you know, taking our intellectual property. And so with now phase one of the new agreement with China negotiated, there is significant improvement. They've agreed to buy $200 billion in American products, $50 billion of agricultural products. When you look at the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, again, there was all sorts of negotiations, but now we're at a place where there are new markets for our dairy products in Canada, and there are tremendous incentives to manufacture here in Michigan because of this new trade agreement. But the tariffs were a negotiating tactic, and my hope is that we can get away from tariffs in general and have open, fair, free trade. But fairness has to be at the forefront, and that's where the president has been standing up for our national interests.
How are you dealing with this on a direct level when it comes to portions of your 4th district? We look up to the northwest, the cherry crop, and whether it's the tariffs or deals that have come through with lower costs, the cherry crop from Turkey that has had such an impact, those folks, and that's a huge economic engine for Michigan, have been impacted. What work is being done to address that and get them back on the right side of the equation for Michigan?
Sure. Well, you make a good point, and you know, cherries are vital to Northwest Michigan for our economy. You know, the cherries from Turkey have been dumped on this country, and it is something that is an unfair trade practice. We've been talking with the trade representative as well as the USDA, Department of Agriculture, to find out what remedies there can be to help our cherry growers compete fairly, but also recognize they have been harmed by this adverse trade policy and tactics by Turkey. And so, you know, we've met with the different government officials. We talked with the cherry producers, working very closely with Jack Bergman, who's a congressman, and also Bill Huizenga, both of whom represent a lot of the cherry growers in Michigan. And we're working as a team to raise this issue and hopefully get some resolution.
Those two colleagues from your Republican caucus as well, and you mentioned the move towards the increased manufacturing opportunities that are expected out of, or the doors that will be open from the trade deals that have been signed. Do we have any immediate word on where, and in particular your 4th district, we might see either expansion of existing manufacturing or business startups that will help bring some of that business development for the state as a whole up into the central and northern parts of the state that you represent?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's, you know, the 3 leaders of the different countries have signed the agreement. Mexico and the United States have both passed it in Congress or the Parliament. Canada still has to pass it for it to fully go into effect. But the good news is that already, dairy producers who have really been struggling with lower milk prices are seeing new opportunities opening up in Canada. The auto industry has been announcing record levels of new investments in Michigan and the United States. That's all good news because in Michigan we have the auto industry, but we also have a lot of the supply chain that goes into manufacturing autos. And so when you consider that anytime the auto industry is growing in this area, their suppliers who are throughout the 4th District are going to benefit from that as well. And so when I tour companies around Michigan's 4th District, what I hear is, we could be hiring more workers because, the economy's growing, our business is growing. We just need to make sure they have the right skill set and the right, skilled trades. Career and technical education has become so vital for training for those jobs, and people are hiring. So that's good news.
If they don't have the full green light then yet, do they at least have the plans on the table and they're ready to go? And then that gets directly to the question of the labor shortage, the population that we lost during the extreme downturn and the single state recession, whether it's through training programs, whether it's attracting folks back to the state for the workforce. And I hear this from the state lawmakers as well, that this continues to be an ongoing huge drag on the progress that we would like to be making, because either the skill set or the numbers of workers go to the roads project. Up and down the line, it's bodies to do the work.
Yeah, the good news is Michigan is growing, the economy, jobs, unemployment is low. People are coming back to our state. That was, as you mentioned, a huge problem in that lost decade where people were leaving the state in droves. But now it's, let's bring people here, let's make sure they have the training. We're looking at ways on the federal level to give more flexibility to institutions of higher education, whether it's community colleges or universities, flexibility in designing programs that meet the needs of the workforce and use resources like the Pell Grant and other resources that will help prepare young people for jobs, and also people who have been in the workforce but may need retraining. And so kind of a non-conventional student who may need a short-term certificate, but they can come out and get a job that can support a family, but they just need that opportunity. And so we're looking at all those options. Again, it comes to partnering with education, with the private sector, and providing opportunities and education for our next generation.
To the president's budget itself, and when it comes to those that like to talk numbers on both sides of the aisle, a cut is sometimes not always a cut, but rather a reduction in the amount of increase from one budget year to the next. Sometimes a cut would be down to zero. Sometimes a cut would be at least a reduction in funding. When we talk about the major issues such as Medicaid, Social Security, we know public broadcasting on that list as well. There are proposed cuts in the president's budget. Are you defining these as true cuts or some variation on the theme?
Well, it's important that the president has a budget proposal, and that is a blueprint for what priorities the president has. That proposal never becomes law. What becomes law is what is done in Congress, where there are 12 appropriations bills that go through the House, through the Senate, some kind of conference committee agreement, and then go to the president for signature. So for example, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, that's something that a number of colleagues and I have had the opportunity to talk with the president about the importance of that, why we need to have, the Great Lakes have 20% of the world's fresh water. We are concerned about invasive species. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, Central Michigan University plays a key role in researching ways to keep invasive species out of the Great Lakes and to provide better habitat. A few years ago, the president proposed $30 million. The Obama administration had proposed at $1.50 million. And what we've been able to do is talk about the significance of that. So this time the president proposed $320 million. Now, that's progress, but at the same time, it was really the appropriations that were signed into law that made the most impact. And that was something that we had done at $300 million over the last several years and have been consistently a bipartisan priority that the executive branch has supported. But again, this year the president proposed $320 billion. That is a huge, significant improvement over what it's been in the past. I keep interchanging. It's 300 million, 320 million.
As a member of the House Appropriations Committee, then where do you find agreement with the president on many of the items as proposed? And for that matter, where do you find any disagreements that you hope to negotiate further on?
Well, we want to continue to highlight, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I mean, a lot of the items in one of the subcommittees I'm on, the Labor, Health, Education Subcommittee, public television is something that we want to see that at the levels that it's been in the past, and certainly are going to advocate that as it goes through the process. When you look at funding for things like the Sioux Locks, the new construction of the Sioux Locks, that is a huge priority, and we've made tremendous progress there. First time in 30 years that we've been able to actually now let a contract so that a new lock will be built there. That's something that the president and Congress are working, lockstep, and it's great for Michigan.
As President George H.W. Bush, President Clinton, President George W. Bush, President Barack Obama, 5 presidents. Why 30 years to get money to the locks?
Well, it's one of those.
I realize you weren't there 30 years ago,
Right.
but from our standpoint of born Michiganders, obviously everybody's been frustrated about why this has taken so long.
Well, like infrastructure needs, sometimes it's easy to say they're important, but maybe not as urgent as other priorities. And so in this case, you have 50-year-old infrastructure. Homeland Security did a report that said if this infrastructure were ever to go down, it would be the Achilles heel of the North American industrial economy. We had the opportunity to brief the president on this when he came to Michigan, talked about the importance of the Sioux Locks, asked him to support funding for a new lock, and he came out when he came to Michigan and announced that he would support it. He has put it in his budget. Congress has worked in a bipartisan way to get it done. And we're having progress. And why this is so important is all this iron ore that comes from Minnesota and goes into the manufacturing of steel for autos, appliances, comes through those locks. And so we need to have that thrive as a mode of commerce.
If the new trade deals go through as planned, could we anticipate a growth in level of trade to the point where that Sioux lock project could be expanded beyond the construction of the one additional lock?
We'll see. So much, we'll have to see how this all works, but United States, Canada, Mexico, that's a huge trade corridor. And anything we can do to keep building the trading relationships there and help with our exports especially, I think is very beneficial. And then we're going to be looking at all sorts of ways to improve the transportation and make sure we lower trade barriers and open up those markets. And I think it's really good for our consumers here in this country, but also our suppliers who are exporting goods through those two countries.
You noted your position on the House Appropriations Subcommittees for Health and Human Services, Labor and Education. Also, you serve in the one for Food and Drug Administration. Do we have anything further on the battle against the opioid epidemic?
We are working very closely with state governments and health organizations to fight the opioid epidemic. The CDC is working on that. There are grants that are available for state and local entities to participate and help. We also, I've done roundtables throughout our district where we talk about this, what's happening on the ground here and how can we help. And a few very positive things that are happening on the national level. The National Institutes of Health continues to do research on non-addictive pain medicines. And I think that's something that as that develops and gains greater acceptance, that could also be helpful in this challenge.
On any of these subcommittee areas, we don't want to look at this completely from President's budget proposal down, but obviously with the balance and initiatives that are coming from the legislature, what are particular measures in those areas for those committees that you are a member of that you or members of the committee are talking about as far as policy initiatives you want to begin working on?
Well, we want to continue the work fighting opioids. We want to continue to expand access to rural broadband. When it comes to the internet access, it's important for families who are educating their children at home, or they have a project at school and then they want to come work on it at home and they can't access the internet. That's a problem. For businesses to be competitive, they need to have access to the internet. And now in healthcare, when you look at all the advances in telemedicine and opportunities for people not to have to drive 2 and 3 hours to a medical appointment, but can do over the internet, that's an opportunity as well. So that's another key priority. We're continuing to fund cancer research, fight against Alzheimer's. And so many priorities, but it's the beginning of the process. And next week when I go back to Washington, we'll begin having hearings in the Labor, Health, Education Subcommittee.
Late in 2019, you were also in support of legislation designed to increase the number of doctors in rural areas. You just mentioned the internet, broadband, and telemedicine. What will this do to impact the health care potentially for the rural areas in your district or the central and northern part of the state? And does any of that include upgrades or improvements, investment in the potential for the telemedicine options?
Sure. Well, one of the things we're working on is finding ways to help ease the financial burden on physicians who want to choose in lower paying specialties, and especially in areas where there's a need. So in rural Michigan, for instance, there's a need for more doctors. So easing that debt burden is something, to help with recruitment and retainment of doctors. When I was on the state level, I worked very closely with Central Michigan University and others to promote a program called MyDocs, which would, again, improve the pipeline of physicians that would be serving in rural areas and underserved areas, and allow universities and hospitals to collaborate on the best ways to provide training for our next generation of physicians. And so I think it's partly a state priority, partly a federal priority, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that areas that are underserved, and I put rural Michigan as a big part of this, we want to make every opportunity for people who desire to serve in these roles can do it financially and can help these communities.
We have heard about impending physician shortages as we see a couple of generations of physicians coming to the end of careers and wondering if we've got them in the pipelines. CMU's medical school is focused on bringing those general practice doctors, getting them from these areas, sending them to these areas, keeping them there. Is it a matter of managing the costs? Is it a matter of finding a way for these health centers to survive and stand alone? Because we have seen so many bigger operations to merge and absorb other things. So you've got sometimes access to fewer outlets for the healthcare, brings in the telemed. And I'm not trying to make a layered question, but all of these things play. What is the key component that can streamline or smooth out that process all the way through to make sure that the care is there?
Well, I think your point about the technology and telemedicine, that can really work well in some areas. That's not going to meet every need. The combination of helping alleviate some of the long-term debt that physicians face when they come to an area, that's something that is also going to help with the process. What we find too is that where people do their training, or where they receive their education and then do their different training, that also makes a difference, because if someone lives in northern Michigan or some part of Michigan and they like the quality of life, they're much more likely to go there rather than some other area of the state or of the country, because they've experienced the quality of life. So we want to make sure they have those residency slots available and the opportunity to be trained in an area where there's a need. So it's a combination of all of the above. The other is making sure that we're keeping costs of healthcare down, so that hospitals and providers can be successful and stay vibrant in a community. And I look at the federal policies that we have. I don't think a Medicare for all strategy would be helpful for our healthcare system, for either the patients or the practitioners. But we need to find innovative ways to drive down the costs of healthcare and at the same time bring people in who are interested in serving and can make it financially.
Many issues to tackle. Our biggest wish is that there will be at least a halfway peaceful playing field to work out some of these in Washington as you get back. Thanks as always for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you for joining us here again on Capitol Report here on WCMU. Our program to be rebroadcast this Sunday at 5:30. Check your local listings, and also goes to our website, posted there on the page for Capitol Report. That's through our website at WCMU.org. Thanks to all behind the scenes, our great crew, as always, here at WCMU Public TV. I'm David Nicholas. Appreciate your company as always, and we will talk again soon.